So, what if the reason you feel completely paralyzed by major life choices has, like, absolutely nothing to do with fear?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Right, like, what if it actually has everything to do with how your brain was physically wired when you were, say, 5 years old?
It's a pretty wild concept to wrap your head around.
It really is. So welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. I am your host, and I'm here with our resident expert to unpack a really fascinating stack of notes, articles, and research.
And we are looking specifically at the architecture of choice and the independent mind.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Because we are tackling a deeply fundamental question today. Why do so many incredibly capable, highly intelligent adults just completely freeze when the guardrails of life are taken away?
Right. And how does the way we were raised to think actually dictate the very shape of our entire society?
Which is huge. So our mission for this deep dive is to look at the hidden mechanics of decision-making. We're going to show you why true independence isn't just about, knowing facts.
No, not at all.
It's about the really messy, vital practice of navigating uncertainty. So I want you, the listener, to think about the last major life choice you made.
Yeah, think back to it. Did it feel empowering?
Right. Or did it feel like this reactive, panic scramble fueled by external pressure?
For a lot of people, it is definitely the latter. It is a phenomenal topic because, well, we tend to treat decision-making as an innate trait.
Like you either have it or you don't.
Exactly. We think you either have good judgment or you're just bad at choices. But the sources we're looking at today reframe this entirely.
They really do.
That capacity to choose, to weigh uncertainty, it doesn't just, spontaneously appear when someone turns 18.
Oh, for sure.
It is built, quite literally, neural pathway by neural pathway.
Yeah.
And it starts from our earliest interactions with the world.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the core premise here suggests that we fundamentally misunderstand how sound decision-making is formed in childhood.
We really do get it wrong.
I mean, I think about my own life, and I can experience, like, full-blown decision paralysis staring at a 10-page diner menu.
Oh, absolutely. The Cheesecake Factory effect.
Yes. It is overwhelming. So how on earth am I supposed to confidently choose a mortgage or a career pivot?
It's a huge leap.
But to understand that adult paralysis, the research says we have to look backward. We have to look at how children are taught to interact with the world from day one.
Right, the early conditioning.
Yeah, because in so many homes and cultures, kids are raised on a rigidly fixed set of beliefs, strict traditions, and highly specific, quote-unquote, correct ways of thinking.
And we should clarify right away that this is almost always done with the best of intentions.
Oh, 100%.
Parents, teachers, communities, they want to protect children. They want to pass down hard-won wisdom, keep them safe from danger.
Ensure they fit seamlessly into their culture.
Exactly. But the unintended consequence is just profound. By handing down a completely prepackaged worldview, the adults leave absolutely no room for the child to question.
No room to explore.
Right. Or to make an actual choice of their own.
I was trying to visualize this earlier, and I realized it's exactly like bowling with the bumpers up your entire childhood.
Oh, that is a great analogy.
Right. You go to the alley, you roll the heavy ball, it bounces off those inflated tubes, hits the pins, and you feel like an absolute pro.
You're just racking up strikes.
Exactly. But the second you're an adult, standing in a real lane without those bumpers, the ball goes straight into the gutter.
And you have no idea why.
None. Because you never actually learned how to aim, how to adjust your stance or put spin on the ball. You just relied on the guardrails.
What's fascinating here is the distinction the sources make between analyzing and memorizing.
Okay, say more about that.
It really comes down to cognitive science. We need to stop thinking of decision-making as a sudden event and start recognizing it as an ongoing physical process in the brain.
A physical process.
Yeah. Think of the brain's decision-making center like a dense, overgrown forest. Every time a child is forced to weigh two options and predict an outcome, they're basically hacking a new trail through that forest with a machete.
Wow. Okay, that sounds like hard work.
It is incredibly hard work.
Oh.
But every time they do it, that trail gets a little wider and easier to navigate.
So it's about repetition.
Yes. When children compare options, evaluate pros and cons, and critically, when they are allowed to make the wrong choice and fail, they are physically building neural pathways.
The pathways for judgment and reasoning.
Exactly. And creativity, too.
So if they're just following the pre-packaged worldview, they aren't chopping those trails at all.
Not even a little bit.
They're just walking on a paved highway someone else laid down.
Precisely. And the brain is ruthlessly efficient.
Right.
Through a process called synaptic pruning, if a neural pathway isn't being used, the brain just eliminates it to save energy.
It just cuts it off.
Yeah. So if a child's environment is entirely predetermined, if the answers are always just handed to them, there are no options to weigh. The analysis never even begins.
Oh, wow. So over time, those trails for independent evaluation just physically overgrow.
They are completely pruned away. Decision-making becomes purely mechanical, and the brain learns to obey, not to question.
Which results in these adults who might seem incredibly put together on paper.
Oh yeah, they look great from the outside.
Right. They're highly educated, they have great jobs, they're articulate, they appear to know exactly what is right and wrong in the world.
But it's an illusion.
Exactly. The illusion is that they only, quote-unquote, know it because they were told, not because they analyzed the situation, weighed the variables, and arrived at it themselves.
Through their own cognitive labor, right?
Yeah.
And that creates a very specific, somewhat fragile kind of adult existence.
Fragile is a good word for it.
The notes we're exploring use a brilliant analogy for this mental framework. Living within these inherited, predetermined bounds is like driving a car in a single gear.
Oh, like driving your entire life in first gear.
Yes, the vehicle is moving.
Yeah.
You are getting from point A to point B, which provides this profound illusion of stability and success.
Because you're moving forward, so it feels safe.
It feels incredibly safe and efficient, but your range is severely restricted. If you try to go too fast, the engine just screams.
Right.
And because you are locked in that single gear, there's absolutely no need to actively respond to dynamic changes in the road. You just keep pressing the gas.
But the reality is, life doesn't stay on a flat, empty road.
Never.
You can't navigate the entirety of human existence in first gear. Meaningful growth, the messy, complicated stuff that actually makes a life rich, happens in environments that demand constant adjustment.
It's like driving through heavy traffic.
Yes. Unpredictable, aggressive city traffic. Every single moment requires your attention. You have to recalibrate, hit the brakes, check your blind spots.
You're making active, split-second decisions based on constantly changing data.
Exactly. And those who have spent their childhoods hacking those trails in the forest, the ones who practice the art of choosing, they can respond to that traffic smoothly.
They can shift gears easily.
But those who haven't practiced, when the traffic of life inevitably gets heavy, they just freeze.
Or worse, they panic. They fall back on those inherited patterns.
They desperately try to use the bowling bumpers from their childhood.
Even if those patterns are completely inappropriate for the adult situation they are facing.
But wait, isn't that just a lack of maturity or intelligence? I mean, I'm thinking about people I know.
It's a natural assumption.
Right, because listeners are probably thinking the same thing. I know engineers who can design complex aerospace components, or corporate lawyers who can, deconstruct a 500-page merger contract.
Brilliant people.
Super brilliant, but they completely freeze up when trying to figure out whether to stay in a relationship that makes them miserable or whether to change career paths.
Yes, the 30-something crisis.
Yeah. So are you telling me that an adult with that level of raw intellectual horsepower literally lacks the cognitive hardware to make a personal choice?
That is exactly what the research argues. It is emphatically not a lack of intelligence, and it is not simply emotional immaturity.
Okay. So what is it?
It is strictly a lack of practice. Let's separate raw processing power from trained capacity.
Gotcha.
Decision-making, particularly open-ended personal agency where there is no clear right answer, is a specific, trained cognitive muscle.
Okay, that makes sense.
Think about it like this. You wouldn't expect someone with a genius-level IQ to sit down at a grand piano and instantly play a Chopin concerto if they have never practiced the scales.
Right. Doesn't matter how smart they are. Their fingers literally don't know the instrument.
Exactly. If you haven't trained the cognitive muscle of open-ended choice, you will freeze. All the raw processing power in the world cannot replace the specific neural pathways built by actually navigating uncertainty.
Okay, wow. So when that brilliant lawyer hits their early 30s and they face a massive, unavoidable choice like choosing a life partner.
Or deciding whether to have kids.
Right. They are suddenly on an unpaved road with no map.
The bumpers just disappear completely.
Yeah.
And if you've never practiced making independent choices on a smaller scale, these monumental decisions often become entirely reactive.
They're dictated by a ticking clock.
Or by what their peer group is doing, or what their family expects.
It becomes a decision made out of pure panic.
Yes, a desire to just relieve the tension of uncertainty, rather than a choice made out of conscious alignment with their own values.
That is heavy. It's like a skill issue masquerading as a life crisis.
That is a great way to put it.
But here's where my mind goes with this. If their brains literally lack the hardware for small daily choices and they are just white-knuckling the steering wheel through their personal lives, what happens when it's not just one person?
Oh, this is where it scales up.
Right. If one adult freezes when making a choice, it's a personal tragedy. But what happens when millions of adults operate this way? How does that shape an entire culture?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the scaling effect is where things get truly concerning.
Because it's not just individuals anymore.
Right. Because millions of individuals who do not actively, consciously choose their own paths inevitably form a deeply passive society.
Wow.
The paralysis stops being a personal quirk and becomes the defining characteristic of the civic infrastructure.
Right, because a brain trained only to follow instructions doesn't see a pothole as something to fix. It sees it as a new rule to obey.
Yes, you just swerve around the pothole every day and never ask why it's there.
So the true cost of a bumper lane childhood isn't just a midlife crisis. It's the death of the active citizen.
That is exactly it. People begin to accept broken systems exactly as they are.
We see this everywhere.
Everywhere. In massive bureaucracies, in failing corporate cultures, and in local governance. People might complain endlessly about the dysfunction.
Oh, they'll vent around the water cooler all day.
Or post angry messages online. But they rarely take actual material action. They don't assume any personal responsibility for driving change.
Because taking action requires making a choice.
It requires taking the car out of first gear and risking a stall.
Exactly. And the structural consequences are highly visible, right? Citizens stop demanding accountability from their institutions.
Yes. Expectations for basic public infrastructure, for healthcare systems, for transparent governance, they all just plummet.
So the populace and the institutions basically enter into this unspoken, insidious trade-off.
Let's see if you can guess what it is.
Well, the institutions offer the illusion of stability, right?
Yep.
And the citizens agree not to rock the boat.
Precisely. Systems maintain the status quo by offering short-term comfort and predictability, rather than doing the messy, difficult work of building long-term solutions.
So both the givers, the institutions, and the receivers, the citizens, they simply settle.
They settle. And this leads to perhaps the most chilling observation in our source material today. The ultimate danger to a society is not ignorance. It is not a lack of information or a failure to comprehend the problems.
Oh, man. The danger is knowing.
Yes.
It's understanding exactly how dysfunctional the system is, seeing the cracks in the foundation, and still actively choosing an action.
It's a terrifying thought.
So what does this all mean? Like, for you, listening right now, it's a tough mirror to look into.
It really is.
Are you accepting a broken system in your own life? Maybe a toxic dynamic at your workplace, or a failing initiative in your local community, just because it's the devil you know.
Are you staying in that single gear because shifting feels too jarring?
Exactly. Because it jolts the nervous system.
It is deeply uncomfortable to confront.
Yeah.
And the research highlights a very clear biological reason why people avoid stepping outside of their inherited behaviors.
The brain wants to protect itself.
Right. Change creates uncertainty, and uncertainty is interpreted by the primitive parts of the brain as a literal threat to survival.
A physical threat.
Yes. Changing your mind, choosing a new path, or even just questioning a long-held family tradition forces you to take responsibility for the outcome.
Right, because if you choose the path and it fails, it is your fault.
And that level of accountability feels like a massive disruption to the nervous system.
So it's just easier to stay within the familiar boundaries, let the bumper guide the ball.
Much easier.
Yeah.
But the cost is astronomical.
Because a life without active choice just becomes a loop. It becomes repetitive, moving in circles without adding any new dimensions.
Your growth literally stalls.
Not because the opportunities aren't out there, but purely because your active engagement with the world is missing.
Which brings us to the necessary pivot here.
Right, how do we fix this?
To break this cycle of stagnation, both personally and societally, we have to look at how we raise the next generation.
But sources argue we need a fundamental shift.
Yes. We must fundamentally shift our approach from control to cultivation. If we want to raise thinkers instead of followers, we have to change the environment they grow up in.
The environment has to demand choices, which means giving up the illusion that we can, protect kids from every single bump in the road.
Right. Children don't need more instructions or more rules to memorize.
They need more exposure.
Yes, exposure over instructions. The shift requires deliberately putting them in situations where outcomes are not fixed.
They need opportunities to make small, consequential decisions early on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They need the literal space to question authority, to disagree safely without losing affection, and to explore alternatives.
And critically, and I think this is probably the hardest part for parents, they need the freedom to experience the consequences of their choices.
Oh, it is the hardest part.
Because if a kid makes a poor choice and the parent instantly runs in, pops the bumpers up, and saves them from the fallout, the neurological lesson is completely short-circuited.
It's ruined.
The brain learns that choices aren't real because the safety net is the only reality.
This raises an important question, though.
What's that?
Everything we just discussed applies beautifully to raising a 5-year-old. But we are talking to adults.
Very true.
How do we, as adults who perhaps grew up with those bumpers firmly bolted into place, apply these interventions to ourselves right now?
How do we step into uncertainty today?
Right. How do we rebuild our own lost agency?
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the brain possesses neuroplasticity.
Yes. The brain can change.
We can essentially parent ourselves in this regard. We don't have to abandon all guidance, quit our jobs, and throw our lives into total chaos just to prove we're independent.
That'd be a terrible idea.
Yeah, please don't do that. But we must intentionally transition our internal dialogue from telling ourselves what to think to teaching ourselves how to think.
It's the active practice of engaging with friction.
Exactly. It means purposefully seeking out situations with unfixed outcomes.
Like sitting in a meeting at work.
Yes, sitting in a meeting where everyone is nodding along with a totally flawed plan, feeling that spike in your heart rate, and giving yourself permission to voice a disagreement.
Or challenging a family tradition that no longer aligns with your values.
It's about taking the car out of first gear on purpose, even if the engine sputters a bit while you fumble to find the clutch.
Every single time you weigh an option, instead of defaulting to habit, every time you pause to ask, why do I actually believe this?
Yeah.
You are hacking a new trail in that forest.
You are laying down a new neural pathway.
You are physically rebuilding your capacity for independent thought. The damage of an overly controlled childhood is not permanent.
Which is such a relief.
The brain is plastic. The cognitive muscle can be rebuilt through intentional daily friction.
I love that. The muscle can be rebuilt. It's incredibly hopeful. So let's pull all of this together because the journey we've taken through these sources today is pretty profound.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. We started by looking at how well-intentioned childhood rules, the perfectly paved paths and the bowling bumpers, inadvertently strip away our brain's ability to analyze and evaluate.
We lose that machete in the forest.
Right. And we saw how a lack of practice chopping those mental trails leads to single-gear adulthoods, where highly intelligent people freeze in the face of life's heavy traffic.
Resulting in those reactive panic choices about careers and partners.
Exactly. And then we scaled that up. We saw how millions of paralyzed adults create a passive society, a culture that settles for short-term comfort, accepts broken systems, and stops demanding better.
The paradox of knowing.
Yes. The true tragedy, as the sources emphasize, is knowing exactly how broken things are and still doing absolutely nothing. It is the tragedy of moving through life without ever actually directing the movement.
It is a sobering realization. And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over something that builds on everything we've discussed today.
I'm ready. Lay it on us.
We've established that decision-making is a cognitive muscle, a trail in the forest that severely atrophies without consistent use and friction.
Right.
If that is true, what happens to our independent minds in our current era of hyperconvenience?
Oh, wow.
We live in a world where algorithms and artificial intelligence are increasingly making thousands of micro-choices for us every single day.
They really are.
From the curated media feeds that tell us what to care about, to the suggested products we buy, to the predictive text that literally finishes our sentences.
And the GPS that dictates the exact route of our commutes.
Exactly. If our brains biologically require the friction of uncertainty to remain conscious, capable, and independent, are we willingly outsourcing that very friction to machines?
Wow. If the brain is a forest, AI is out there paving an 8-lane superhighway through it.
That is exactly what's happening.
Are we using technology to build the ultimate inescapable set of bowling bumpers? Bumpers so perfectly designed, so frictionless that we never even realize we aren't aiming the ball anymore.
It is a terrifying prospect.
That is definitely a question worth sitting with. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. As you go about your day, look for the small ways you can reclaim your choices.
Embrace the friction.
Look for a moment to shift gears and deliberately steer your own course. We'll catch you next time.